Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UCS Harmony and watched the chaos unfold in the main conference room through the viewing screen. Two alien species were shouting at each other in languages that sounded like grinding metal and rushing wind. The Vorthak delegation looked like walking crystals that sparkled with angry red light, while the Zephyrian representatives floated in their gas suits like living clouds of purple mist. Commander Lisa Harper walked between the two groups with her hands raised in a calming gesture. She spoke to the Vorthak in their clicking language first, then turned to address the Zephyrians in their whistling tones. Within minutes, the angry red glow from the crystal beings began to fade to a soft blue, while the purple mist of the gas creatures lightened to a peaceful lavender color. Jake smiled as he watched Lisa work her magic. She had been doing this kind of thing for 15 years now, and still amazed him every time. The trade dispute between these two species had been going on for months until the Galactic Council finally asked for human help. What other species saw as an impossible problem, Lisa solved in one afternoon. Dr. Alex Rodriguez walked up beside Jake and shook his head in wonder. "I still cannot believe how she does that," Alex said as he adjusted his glasses. "The Vorthak think in mathematical patterns while the Zephyrians make decisions based on emotional currents. Any other species would need weeks just to understand what they were really arguing about." Jake nodded and turned away from the screen as Lisa finished the negotiations with both sides shaking hands, or whatever passed for hands in their species. "That is why we are here, Alex. Humans seem to be the only ones who can make sense of all these different ways of thinking." The two men walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime, the largest diplomatic station in the galaxy. Through the transparent walls, Jake could see dozens of different alien species going about their business. Some walked on legs, others floated, and a few rolled along the floor like living boulders. All of them lived and worked together in peace, because humans helped them understand each other. Lieutenant Ben Clark met them at the lift entrance. He was new to the diplomatic corps and still looked nervous around the stranger aliens. "Captain Morrison, sir, Dr. Rodriguez," Ben said with a quick salute. "I have been studying the reports from the Kepler sector negotiations, but I still do not understand how we solved these problems so easily." Alex laughed and patted the young man on the shoulder as they entered the lift. "It is not magic, Ben, though it might seem like it. Humans evolved differently than most species. We lived in small groups for millions of years where we had to cooperate and compete at the same time. We learned to understand many different points of view because our survival depended on it." The lift moved smoothly through the station toward the command center. Jake continued the explanation. "Most alien species evolved with fixed social structures. The hive species think as one mind. The imperial species follow strict hierarchies. The collective species make all decisions by group consensus. But humans learn to switch between all these different modes of thinking depending on what the situation needed." Ben nodded slowly as they exited the lift. "So we can understand how they think, because we think in all those ways ourselves." "Exactly," Alex replied. "When the Vorthak talk about mathematical trade ratios, we understand the logic. When the Zephyrians worry about the emotional impact on their communities, we understand those feelings too. Then we help them see that both concerns are valid and find a solution that works for everyone." They entered the command center where Captain Katie Sullivan was studying sensor readings from her deep space monitoring station. She looked up with a worried expression. "Jake, you need to see this. We are picking up some strange quantum signatures near the galactic rim. The patterns do not match anything in our databases." Jake walked over to examine the data on her screen. The readings showed unusual energy fluctuations that seemed to pulse in regular intervals. "How long have you been detecting these signals, Katie?" "They started appearing about 3 days ago," Katie replied. "At first we thought it might be a natural phenomenon, but the patterns are too regular. It looks like some kind of artificial technology, but nothing we have ever seen before." Alex joined them at the monitoring station and frowned at the readings. The energy signature is definitely artificial, but the quantum frequency is incredibly old. This technology could be millions of years older than anything we know about. Ben looked between the three senior officers with growing concern. Could it be dangerous, sir? Jake studied the data for a few more moments, then straightened up. Unknown technology near the galactic rim is always worth investigating, but for now it does not seem to be affecting any inhabited systems. Katie, keep monitoring those signals and let us know if anything changes. As the group dispersed to their duties, none of them realized that the ancient signals were connected to humanity's growing importance in galactic affairs. Deep in space near the rim, an automated system that had waited for eons was finally beginning to activate. The architects who built it were long dead, but their final safeguard was still functioning. It had detected that one species was becoming too central to galactic civilization, and the Silence Protocol was preparing to correct that dangerous imbalance. The readings on Katie's screen pulsed faster as unknown forces began to gather strength in the darkness between the stars. Jake Morrison woke up to the sound of emergency alarms echoing through the empty corridors of Nexus Prime. He rolled out of his bunk and reached for his communicator, but heard only static. The station felt different somehow, too quiet, even with the alarms blaring. He rushed to the bridge and found it completely empty. Lisa Harper was supposed to be on duty, but her station was abandoned with coffee still steaming in her cup. The main screen showed normal operations throughout the station, but Jake could not see any humans anywhere. He tried calling other sections, but got no response. Racing through the corridors, Jake checked every human quarter and found them all empty. Beds were unmade, personal items scattered around, but no signs of struggle or violence. It looked like everyone had simply walked away in the middle of whatever they were doing. The alien crew members he found seemed just as confused. A Vorthak. Security officer approached him with crystals flashing in distress patterns. "Captain Morrison, where are all the other humans?" the crystal being asked in its clicking language. "We have been searching for 3 hours but cannot find any of them." Jake felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. "What do you mean 3 hours? When did you last see another human?" Commander Harper was mediating a dispute between the thermal and cryogenic delegations at a 600 hours, the Vorthak replied. "When we went to find her at 0900 for the follow-up meeting, she was gone. All security footage from 0630 to 0700 shows humans walking into empty areas, and then they simply disappear." The implications hit Jake like a physical blow. If all the humans on Nexus Prime had vanished, then the same thing might have happened elsewhere. He rushed to the communications center and started sending emergency messages to every human diplomatic post in the galaxy. The responses that came back confirmed his worst fears. 47 star systems reported the same phenomenon. Every human diplomat, negotiator, and mediator had vanished at exactly the same time. The only humans left were those on military vessels or isolated research stations. Within hours, the carefully maintained peace that humans had built began to crumble. The Vorthak and Zephyrian trade agreement that Lisa had negotiated just days before fell apart when a simple greeting gesture was misinterpreted as an insult. Both species recalled their delegates and started moving warships toward the disputed. Border Colonel Ryan Peters contacted Jake from the Kepler sector where he was stranded after his diplomatic team vanished. "Jake, this is getting bad fast," Ryan reported through the static-filled transmission. "The three-way talks between the Hive, the Aquatic Federation, and the Silicon Consortium have completely broken down. Without human translators, they cannot even understand each other's basic communications." Jake watched the main screen as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Species that had lived in peace for decades were suddenly preparing for war. Trade routes were shutting down as mutual suspicion replaced the trust that human mediators had carefully built over centuries. Dr. Susan Blake contacted them from a remote archaeological site where she had been studying ancient ruins. "Jake, think I know what is happening," she said over the long-range communicator. "The ruins here contain warnings about something called the Silence Protocol. It was designed by an extinct race called the Architects." "What kind of protocol, Susan?" Jake asked as he tried to coordinate the growing crisis. "From what I can translate, it seems to be an automated defense system," Susan replied. "The Architects created it after they watched their own mediator species try to take over the galaxy. The protocol activates when it detects one species becoming too important to galactic stability." Jake felt the pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "You are saying this ancient system kidnapped our people because we became too central to galactic civilization?" "That appears to be exactly what happened," Susan confirmed. "The ruins show that it happened before. The previous galactic civilization lasted 50,000 years before their bridge species vanished and everything collapsed into chaos." On the main screen, Jake could see the situation deteriorating by the hour. The Thermal Dominion had just fired warning shots at a cryogenic coalition convoy. The Quantum Collective was threatening to cut off all technology exports. The Empathic Consortium was broadcasting emotional distress calls that were driving several species into panic. Without humans to explain cultural contexts and emotional nuances, every interaction between species was becoming a potential flashpoint. The Cybernetic Union interpreted everything in pure logic, while the Organic Alliance responded with pure emotion. Species that thought in mathematics could not communicate with species that thought in music. Colonel Peters reported again with worse news. "Jake, the shooting has started. The thermal and cryogenic forces are exchanging fire near the Vega system. They each think the other side planned the disappearance of human mediators as some kind of attack." Jake realized that the galaxy was spiraling toward a war that could destroy hundreds of civilizations. The economic systems were already failing, as trade agreements became meaningless without human oversight. Supply chains that had functioned for centuries were breaking down as species refused to trust each other. He opened communications to all remaining human military units. "This is Captain Morrison to all human forces. We have a galaxy-wide crisis. Every human diplomat has been taken by some kind of ancient automated system. We need to find them and get them back before everything we built falls apart." The responses came in from scattered human ships across the galaxy. Most were small vessels with limited capabilities, but they represented the only hope of preventing total galactic war. Jake began coordinating search efforts while trying to maintain some kind of communication between the increasingly hostile alien species. As he worked, Jake realized that humanity had become so good at their role as galactic mediators that no one else had learned how to do it. The entire structure of galactic civilization depended on human skills that seemed simple, but were actually incredibly complex. Without them, the galaxy was like a machine missing its most crucial component. The alarms continued to blare as Jake prepared for what might be the most important mission in galactic history. The first shots of the galactic war were fired 72 hours after the humans disappeared. Commander Greg Thompson watched through the viewport of the Quantum Collective Research Station as Thermal Dominion battleships opened fire on a cryogenic coalition supply convoy. The bright flashes of energy weapons lit up the darkness between the stars like deadly fireworks. Greg had been trapped on the research station when his diplomatic team vanished. The Quantum Collective hosts were logical beings who thought in pure mathematics and data streams. They had been working peacefully with dozens of other species until the human mediators disappeared. Now they were executing crew members from other species because they believed those aliens had betrayed them. The problem was a simple misunderstanding about data transmission protocols. The Organic Alliance used emotional context in their communications, while the Quantum Collective used only raw data. Without humans to explain that the organic beings were expressing concern rather than suspicion, the collective interpreted every message as a threat. Greg tried to explain this to the collective leader, but his words fell on deaf sensors. "Commander, Thompson, your species taught us to trust others, but now we see that trust was a weakness," the synthetic being said in its mechanical voice. The organic life forms are clearly plotting against us based on their emotional data patterns. Meanwhile, Admiral Carol Hunt was coordinating the desperate search for the missing humans from her flagship. The quantum signatures that Katie Sullivan had detected were growing stronger and seemed to be coming from outside normal spacetime. Carol had every available human ship scanning for their lost people while trying to prevent the galaxy from tearing itself apart. The economic collapse was happening faster than anyone had predicted. The Galactic Trade Commission shut down when member species started accusing each other of manipulating the markets. Supply lines that had operated smoothly for centuries broke down as species refused to honor contracts without human oversight. Dr. Nina Foster was working frantically with a group of alien scientists who remembered human diplomatic techniques. They were trying to document exactly how humans had mediated conflicts, but it was like trying to explain music to someone who had never heard sound. Human diplomacy involved understanding emotional subtext, cultural background, historical context, and intuitive social dynamics all at the same time. The humans did not just translate our words, explained a crystalline delegate who had worked with human mediators for decades. They translated our thoughts, our feelings, our entire way of seeing the universe. They could understand how we think and help others understand it too. Nina realized that humans had been performing an incredibly complex form of psychological and cultural translation that other species had never learned to do themselves. When the empathic consortium sent emotional broadcasts, the humans understood both the literal meaning and the cultural significance. When the Logic Federation sent mathematical proofs, the humans grasped both the data and the philosophical implications. The fighting was spreading rapidly across multiple sectors. The thermal cryogenic conflict had drawn in their respective allies, creating two massive military blocs. Ancient grudges that had been buried for centuries were resurging without human peacekeepers to maintain perspective and find compromise solutions. Captain Michelle Torres witnessed the complete breakdown of the Galactic Council when she tried to organize an emergency session. Species after species withdrew their representatives, claiming that the entire system had been a human conspiracy to control them. The beautiful chamber where hundreds of different life forms had worked together in harmony became empty except for the few humans still trying to hold things together. "Without human mediators, we cannot even agree on what we are disagreeing about," said a frustrated delegate from the Aerial Confederacy. "Every species interprets every statement differently, and there is no one left who can explain what everyone really means." Dr. Peter Davis made a breakthrough in his study of the architect ruins. He discovered records showing that the previous galactic civilization had faced the same crisis when their mediator species vanished. That ancient galaxy had descended into a 1,000-year dark age before the surviving species learned to communicate again. The Silence Protocol is designed to prevent any single species from becoming the central pillar of galactic civilization, Peter reported to Admiral Hunt. The architects believed this was necessary to prevent domination, but they did not consider that some species might be natural mediators rather than would-be conquerors. Peter's research revealed that the missing humans were being held in a pocket dimension created by architect technology. They were alive but completely cut off from normal space-time. The pocket existed outside the regular universe and could only be accessed through quantum manipulation techniques that were beyond current galactic technology. The war was escalating to levels not seen in galactic history. Species that had been peaceful for millennia were building weapons and forming military alliances based on ancient evolutionary instincts. The hive species began preparing for swarm warfare, while the imperial species activated their conquest protocols. Greg Thompson managed to escape the quantum collective station just before they decided to eliminate all non-synthetic life forms as potential threats. He contacted Admiral Hunt with devastating news. Carol the Collective is preparing to launch a data virus that will shut down all organic neural networks. They believe this is a logical solution to prevent further betrayal. The irony was not lost on any of the remaining humans. In trying to prevent one species from dominating the galaxy, the Silence Protocol had created conditions that would likely lead to the extinction of most galactic life. Without human mediators to maintain the delicate balance between hundreds of different species, the galaxy was reverting to its natural state of conflict and competition. Admiral Hunt realized they were running out of time. The quantum signatures were growing stronger, which suggested the pocket dimension was becoming more stable and harder to breach. If they could not rescue the human mediators soon, the galaxy might fall into a dark age that could last thousands of years. As she coordinated rescue efforts, Carol wondered if this was how galactic civilizations always ended, not with conquest or natural disaster, but with the simple failure to understand each other. General Paul Adams stood in the command center of the largest rescue fleet ever assembled in galactic history. Ships from dozens of species floated in formation around his flagship, despite the growing conflicts between their governments. The crews all understood that without their human mediators back, the entire galaxy would destroy itself. Dr. Karen White worked at the Quantum Analysis Station, trying to understand the architect technology that held their people prisoner. The pocket dimension existed in a space between dimensions where normal physics did not apply. Karen had been studying quantum mechanics for 30 years, but this technology was like nothing she had ever seen. The dimensional barrier is held in place by quantum locks that require specific frequency combinations to open, Karen explained to the assembled rescue team leaders. The problem is that we need to generate 17 different quantum frequencies simultaneously, and our current technology can only manage 5 at once. Lieutenant Commander Steve Johnson volunteered to lead the first team into the pocket dimension, once they found a way to breach the barrier. He had experience with dangerous rescue missions and specialized equipment that might help him survive in the unstable dimensional space. The situation outside was getting worse by the hour. The cybernetic Union had declared war on all organic life forms, claiming that carbon-based species were inherently irrational and dangerous. The Organic Alliance responded by cutting off all technology exports and forming military pacts with other biological species. Captain Michelle Torres reported from the former Galactic Council chambers where she was trying to prevent complete governmental collapse. Paul, we have lost contact with over 60 species who have withdrawn from all galactic institutions. The few representatives still here are demanding that their governments prepare for species survival warfare. The economic systems were in free fall. The galactic credit exchange crashed when nobody could agree on currency values without human economists to explain the complex interdependencies. Worlds that had relied on interstellar trade for basic necessities were facing starvation as supply ships stopped running. Steve Johnson gathered his rescue team and prepared their dimensional breach equipment. The plan was risky, because they did not fully understand the space they would be entering. Karen's calculations suggested that time moved differently in the pocket dimension, and they might age years in what felt like hours. Remember that the missing humans have been trapped for over a week in our timeline, but they may have experienced months or even years, Steve told his team as they suited up in their quantum-shielded gear. They might be suffering from isolation psychosis or temporal displacement syndrome. Dr. Peter Davis continued studying the architect ruins and made a disturbing discovery about the civilization that created the Silence Protocol. The architects had not been evil, but they had watched their own mediator species gradually take control of galactic government. What started as helpful mediation had slowly evolved into subtle manipulation and eventually open domination. The architects created the Silence Protocol as their final act before their mediator species completed their conquest, Peter reported to Admiral Hunt. They believed it was better to destroy galactic civilization than allow it to be enslaved. This revelation cast human activities in a troubling new light. Were humans really just helpful mediators, or had they been unconsciously moving toward the same pattern of control that had doomed the previous galaxy? The Silence Protocol might have activated not because humans were planning conquest, but because they had become so central that galactic civilization could not function without them. Karen achieved a breakthrough when she realized that the quantum frequencies needed to breach the dimensional barrier could be generated by combining the natural emissions of different species. The crystalline Vorthak could produce 3 frequencies, the gaseous Zephyrians could generate 4 more, and various other species could contribute the remaining signals. We need perfect coordination between 12 different species to generate the quantum key, Karen announced to the rescue fleet. Each species must synchronize their natural energy emissions to create a harmonic resonance that will unlock the dimensional barrier. The challenge was getting 12 species to work together, when most of them were preparing for war with each other. Admiral Hunt spent hours in negotiations that would have been simple with human mediators, but became incredibly complex diplomatic puzzles without them. The Thermal Dominion and Cryogenic Coalition agreed to a temporary ceasefire only when their representatives realized that continued fighting would prevent the rescue mission. The Quantum Collective stopped their attacks on organic species when they calculated that destroying potential allies would reduce their chances of recovering human mediators. Steve Johnson and his team finally breached the dimensional barrier and found themselves in a strange space where reality seemed to shift and flow like liquid. Colors had no names and distances had no meaning. They followed quantum tracking signals toward the location where the missing humans were supposedly being held. They found Jake Morrison and the other captured humans in a vast, empty space that looked like nothing and everything at the same time. The humans appeared healthy but showed signs of severe temporal displacement. Lisa Harper thought she had been trapped for months, while Ben Clark believed only hours had passed. "Steve, thank God you found us," Jake said as the rescue team approached. "We have been trying to understand this place, but the architect technology is beyond anything we know. Time does not work right here, and space keeps changing." The rescue proved more difficult than expected because extracting people from the pocket dimension required maintaining the quantum frequency lock while transporting organic matter through unstable dimensional barriers. The process was slow and dangerous, with the risk that the entire rescue team could become trapped. Meanwhile, the galactic war was escalating toward total destruction. Species were abandoning their colonies and retreating to heavily defended homeworlds. Ancient weapons that had been banned for millennia were being activated. The hive species began constructing war swarms, while the Imperial factions prepared planet-killing devices. Karen realized that even if they rescued all the human mediators, the galaxy might be too damaged to rebuild. Trust between species had been shattered and ancient fears had been awakened. It would take more than human diplomacy to repair the damage that had been done. The rescue mission faced a terrible deadline as the quantum instabilities in the pocket dimension were growing. Worse, if they did not extract everyone soon, the entire space might collapse, taking the trapped humans with it. The galaxy erupted into total war as the thermal cryogenic conflict spread like a virus infecting every sector. General Laura Martinez coordinated the defense of civilian populations from her command ship as ancient alliance systems collapsed, and species reverted to their most primitive survival instincts. Captain Danny Roberts watched in horror from the bridge of his patrol vessel as an entire star system burned. The Silicon Consortium had glassed 3 planets belonging to the Carbon Alliance in what they claimed was a preemptive strike. Billions of organic life forms had died in minutes while their crystalline attackers felt nothing but cold mathematical satisfaction. "Laura, this is madness," Danny reported over the secure channel. "The consortium is not just fighting the Carbon Alliance anymore. They are systematically destroying any world that contains organic molecules. They have decided that carbon-based life is inherently unstable and must be eliminated for galactic peace." Laura felt sick as the reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Species that had lived together for centuries now viewed each other as existential threats that had to be destroyed before they could attack first. The careful balance that human mediators had maintained was not just broken, but completely forgotten. The economic collapse accelerated beyond all predictions. Entire civilizations that had specialized in peaceful pursuits found themselves without the resources to survive. The artistic collective had created beautiful works for thousands of years, but had no weapons or military knowledge. The research Federation had advanced science for all species, but could not defend their laboratories from attack. Dr. Helen Garcia made a crucial breakthrough in understanding the architect technology while studying the quantum patterns from her research station. She discovered that the silence protocol could be overridden but only under very specific conditions that seemed almost impossible to achieve. The protocol will deactivate if the major galactic species agree to a new framework that prevents any single species from becoming dominant, Helen transmitted to Admiral Hunt. But the agreement must be genuine consensus, not forced cooperation, and it requires the exact type of diplomatic skills that only humans possess. The terrible irony was obvious to everyone. They needed human mediators to create an agreement that would free the human mediators, but the point of the agreement was to prevent dependence on human mediators. It was a puzzle designed by the architects to be nearly unsolvable. Commander Tony Lewis led a desperate diplomatic mission to convince the warring species to consider Helen's solution. Without human mediation skills, the negotiations were like trying to perform surgery with hammers. Every statement was misunderstood, and every gesture was interpreted as a threat or insult. The empathic consortium broadcast waves of pure terror when they sensed the hostile emotions from other species. The Logic Federation responded with mathematical proofs that emotion was a disease that needed to be cured. The collective species tried to assimilate everyone into group consciousness, while the individual species fought to maintain personal identity. In the pocket dimension, Steve Johnson worked frantically to extract the trapped humans before the dimensional space collapsed. The quantum instabilities were growing worse, and reality was becoming increasingly unstable. Jake Morrison and the other humans were suffering from temporal displacement that made it hard for them to think clearly. "Steve, we have to get out of here soon," Lisa Harper said as she struggled with memories that seemed to come from multiple timelines. "This place is breaking down and taking our minds with it. Some of us have been here for subjective years, while others just arrived, but we all remember different versions of the same events. The extraction process was agonizingly slow because they could only move a few people at a time through the dimensional barrier. Each transfer required perfect coordination between 12 different species whose cooperation was becoming more difficult as the galactic war intensified. Dr. Susan Blake made another disturbing discovery in the architect ruins. The previous galactic civilization had not just collapsed when their mediator species vanished. They had fought a war so destructive that it had sterilized thousands of worlds and set back galactic development by millions of years. The architects recorded everything, Susan reported to the rescue fleet. They watched their galaxy tear itself apart and realized too late that preventing dominance was not worth destroying civilization. Their final message warns against using the silence protocol, but by then it was too late to stop it. The rescue mission faced a terrible choice. They could continue the slow extraction process and risk losing everyone if the dimensional space collapsed, or they could attempt a mass rescue that might save the humans but would destabilize the quantum frequencies, keeping the portal open. Tony Lewis achieved a minor miracle when he convinced 5 species to attend an emergency peace conference. The Thermal Dominion, Cryogenic Coalition, Quantum Collective, Organic Alliance, and Neutral Federation agreed to discuss Helen's solution, but their representatives could barely stay in the same room without attacking each other. "Carbon-based. Life forms are inherently irrational," declared the Quantum Collective representative in its mechanical voice. "Your emotional responses make logical communication impossible." "Your synthetic coldness shows you have no understanding of life itself," replied the Organic Alliance delegate. "How can we trust beings who feel nothing and care for nothing?" The conference was falling apart within hours, as each species interpreted everything through their own cultural lens without humans to provide translation and context. Tony realized they were running out of time as reports came in of new attacks and escalating violence across the galaxy. Karen White detected massive quantum fluctuations that suggested the architect technology was building toward some kind of climax. The silence protocol was not just a passive system, but an active one that would continue escalating until galactic civilization was completely destroyed. The protocol is designed to reset galactic civilization to its pre-spaceflight state, Karen announced with growing alarm. If we cannot override it soon, it will begin targeting technological infrastructure. Every species will be forced back to their homeworlds with no way to reach space again. The ultimate deadline was approaching, and they still had not found a way to save both the trapped humans and the galaxy itself. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source when Dr. Susan Blake discovered that some alien species had been secretly studying human diplomatic techniques for decades. A small group of what they called student diplomats had learned to partially replicate human mediation skills by carefully observing and practicing the methods they had seen humans use. Captain Ashley King was among the first humans rescued from the pocket dimension, and she immediately began working with these alien diplomats. The crystalline researcher named Zenth had spent years analyzing human emotional interpretation methods. The gaseous being called Wisp had mastered the art of translating between logical and emotional communication styles. "We watched humans work for so long that we began to understand the patterns," Zenth explained as its crystal body flickered with soft blue light. "Humans do not just translate words, but translate entire ways of thinking. We learn to recognize these patterns and copy some of the techniques." Ashley realized that this small group of alien diplomats represented hope for creating a new type of mediation system. Instead of relying entirely on humans, they could develop hybrid teams where humans worked alongside aliens who had learned complementary diplomatic skills. The emergency peace conference was saved when these student diplomats arrived and began demonstrating their abilities. Wisp helped the Quantum Collective understand that organic emotions were not random, but followed logical patterns that could be analyzed. Zenth showed the Organic Alliance that synthetic logic was not coldness, but a different way of expressing care for order and stability. Tony Lewis watched in amazement as the alien diplomats slowly built bridges between the warring species. It was not as smooth or intuitive as human mediation, but it worked. The student diplomats had learned enough of the basic techniques to prevent total breakdown, while the rescued humans provided guidance and support. Dr. Helen Garcia realized that this development might be exactly what the silence protocol was waiting for. The architect technology was designed to deactivate when galactic civilization evolved beyond dependence on a single mediator species. The emergence of multi-species diplomatic teams might satisfy that requirement. The protocol is not looking for the elimination of mediation, but for the distributed development of mediation skills, Helen announced to the peace conference. If multiple species can demonstrate diplomatic abilities, then no single species becomes indispensable. Jake Morrison and the other rescued humans threw themselves into the work of training more alien diplomats while simultaneously trying to rebuild the damaged relationships between species. It was exhausting work because they had to overcome not just current conflicts, but the deep suspicions that had emerged during the crisis. The new diplomatic framework that emerged was more complex than the old human-centered system, but also more resilient. Thermal and cryogenic species learned to work together through crystal intermediaries who could understand both temperature-based perspectives. Organic and synthetic species found common ground through gaseous mediators who thought in patterns that bridged biological and mechanical logic. Lisa Harper established the first interspecies diplomatic academy on the rebuilt Nexus Prime station. Human instructors taught alien students the basics of emotional interpretation, cultural translation, and conflict resolution while learning new approaches from their students. The hive species contributed understanding of group consensus methods. The imperial species shared knowledge of hierarchical negotiation techniques. The final test came when the major species were asked to sign a new galactic compact that would prevent future crises. The new Galactic Accord established humans as senior mediators, but within a framework that included trained alien diplomats as equal partners. No single species would control galactic communication again. Captain Michelle Torres watched with relief as delegates from over 200 species signed the accord in a ceremony that would have been impossible weeks earlier. The Silence Protocol detected that galactic civilization had evolved beyond dangerous dependence and began shutting down its ancient systems. "The quantum signatures are fading," reported Dr. Karen White from her monitoring station. "The architect, technology is powering down and returning to dormant status. The protocol considers the threat neutralized." The galaxy began the slow process of rebuilding trust and repairing the damage caused by the crisis. Trade routes were re-established with new oversight committees that included multiple species. The Galactic Council reformed with a structure that prevented any single group from becoming too central to its operation. Jake Morrison returned to his role as a diplomatic captain, but now he worked with a mixed crew that included alien diplomats trained in human techniques. His first officer was Zenth, who had become remarkably skilled at understanding emotional subtleties. His communications officer was Wisp, who could translate between almost any two species. "It is strange how this crisis may have made us stronger," Jake reflected as he watched the diverse crew working together on the bridge. "We nearly lost everything because we became too important. But now we have built something that cannot be destroyed by losing any one piece." Dr. Alex Rodriguez established research programs to study other galaxies that might be facing similar challenges. Long-range sensors had detected signs of advanced civilizations in nearby galaxy clusters, and some showed the warning signs of overdependence on single mediator species. The story concluded with the launch of the first intergalactic diplomatic mission designed to share the lessons learned from the Silence Protocol crisis. The galaxy had learned that their greatest strength was not any single species, but their ability to work together in diversity. Ben Clark, now a senior diplomat himself, stood on the observation deck of the mission ship and looked out at the stars. "We almost lost it all," he said to his alien colleague, a student diplomat from the Aerial Confederacy. "But maybe we needed to nearly lose everything to learn how to really keep it." The galaxy had survived its greatest crisis and emerged with wisdom that would help prevent future civilizations from making the same mistakes. The new Galactic Accord served as both a peace treaty and an instruction manual for building resilient, multi-species societies that could endure for millions of years.